If our numbers. Political placement and enough placement. So. I don't like the short. Personally, I forgot those things. We changed that in the calendar. Mental health in 4 weeks. That's good. Yeah, that's good. And like field experience. I had to write the state and we reduced our staff hours because, well, they were doing 180 because we had to reduce it. It started out 2, and I had to reduce it to 180. And now it's 140 because there's no way you can do 180 and we don't have a week off in between the terms anymore. So we have 2 weeks. Yeah, so literally not enough time. Just not enough. So, I wonder if we're supposed to have my watch on. Is it 10:20? That was impressive. You're like, what time is it? That's just how I live my life. Oh, I forgot the watch on the calendar, but
there isn't a clock in
no.
phone down.
Yeah, and when I like forget my watch, I'm always sad because that's how I have my phone on vibrate, but it vibrates your wrist. Yeah. So if you get messages or texts, now I'll be lost. Sometimes I'll like I'll call you back. Because people suppose I don't think Trevor's coming back. Yeah, I think he's just running around like a crazy person. So they have moments. Yes, different topics. So the students can pick their topics. Oh. And then they all have a moderator. So our moderator, I don't know where you're our moderator? Okay. So he will moderate and ask us questions. So the like questions that they have to do beforehand. Or audience questions. So he'll kind of go around. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was like audience questions.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Last year, we all just did a brief introduction and then talked about our area.
Yeah, it was the same when I did that.
That's how we did it. It worked out. It's well, actually, that's not bad.
So that's.
Well, we actually,
it's all the overlap.
Right.
well, the overlap is good because somebody can always answer every question.
Right.
So having that overlap's a positive thing in this type of system.
Bring my health site class, extra credit, we don't get any credit today.
Uh-huh.
Look at this one.
Yeah, my daughter got that in the business classes. I think probably the nursing faculty, it's not. Oh, yeah.
I didn't do it for all 3 of them.
We can't do it. Yeah, we can't give up. We're too packed, so I suppose.
Does it matter which order we sit in or?
I don't think so. No, I think we can sit anywhere we want. Oh, you can hear it. Yeah.
Does this need to circulate?
I think it might, yeah,
I was thinking that, something.
just so they get credit.
Sign it there.
Excuse me, are we still gonna have the opening statement like that?
Yeah,
Okay.
just
Yes.
like last year. I'm sorry, I can't remember your name.
Varun,
Varun, I'm missing. Nice to meet
I
you.
remember you.
Yes, we remember, I remember you from last year. I just could not remember your name. Didn't want to get it wrong, so. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Climate Teach-In, Climate Impact on Health. So all of us at this table are representatives of various health-related fields, and we all have unique perspectives on how climate change impacts health. I'm Dr. Missy Volino. I am the Director of Nurse Education here at Elmira College, and I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves. We'll start with you.
My name is Ellie Higley. I graduated from Elmira Nursing School in 2018 and went directly into acute inpatient mental health work. Now I work with people with developmental and behavioral disabilities who are also very affected by seasonal changes.
My name is Chris Terry. I'm a psychology professor here at Elmira College. I teach a variety of different things in the psychology program, but one thing I teach is health psychology. So that gives me a little bit of background that I thought was kind of relevant for the topic we're exploring in this particular panel session. I see a few familiar faces because I've offered some folks in my health psychology class extra credit for going to any session today. It doesn't have to be this one. If you are here to also receive some extra credit in addition to just being part of the conversation today, I believe there's a sign-in sheet going around, so just keep an eye out for that. And otherwise, we'd be really interested in questions that you may have.
Hello, I'm Dr. Soti. I'm the Director of Research at Elmira College of Osteopathic Medicine and Medical Faculty, and I've been teaching pharmacology for almost decades now, 2-3 decades, to medical students and residents. And I'm glad I'm back, third time around.
So I guess I can start. So one of the things that I think about as a nurse, I have a license as a nurse practitioner. So I think a lot about how climate change affects individual health. So there's several areas that you see impacted. And one that I'll start with that I think is of interest is the impact of climate change on our respiratory system. So for instance, you all might have noticed last year in the spring, there was that orange haze, right, in the sky from the wildfires in Canada. And it kind of tracked down into the Northeast and went to Europe. If you had allergies, your allergies were worse, right? You all felt worse. As an allergy sufferer, I was miserable. I couldn't take enough Claritin to combat the wildfire. Does anybody know why that is? Why wildfire is so much worse? Any ideas? So it has everything to do with the size of the particulate. So the problem with a wildfire is that as the fire burns, it releases particles into the atmosphere that are so small that they can actually transfer themselves from your lungs into your bloodstream. That's why you might have seen on the news that they were suggesting wearing an N95 mask, especially if you were plagued with lung disease, if you had asthma, if you had allergies. So that's a huge impact on our environment. As things shift and warm up, we might see more of these wildfire impacts. I've lived in this geographic location my whole life. I'm 52 years old. I've never seen anything like what happened last spring. It was unique. We don't get wildfires here. Now, I have been through wildfires in the state of Florida, and that happens there because it's always hot. It's unusual that we had this impact from Canada, and it kind of just shows that things have changed a little bit. So that's one area of physical health that I would, think is hugely impacted by climate change and will impact how we care for our clients. And those who are in underserved populations, if you think about it, if you have money, you can use an air purifier. You can stay in your air-conditioned home and keep yourself out of that wildfire smoke. If you don't have money, you're in it. You can't get out of it. You're stuck. So our vulnerable populations in healthcare were hugely impacted. The elderly, the young, people who don't have the economic means to live in a place that protects them were hugely impacted. And we saw more hospital admissions and more, exacerbations of their existing conditions. They got worse. So I will turn things over. Do we want to do another physical impact? We'll send it to you, Drew.
Sure. Well, thank you for giving this opportunity. First of all, I would like to say the things in natural disasters like wildfires, we used to call them natural disasters because they used to happen naturally. But now, for some reason, in the past few years, as a matter of fact, they are now we call climate change induced crisis. And wildfires, floods, droughting, hurricanes, elevated temperature. I mean, you were talking about Florida. Yes, they have high temperature, but they never had such extreme temperature, water temperature. See, 104 degrees was the maximum last year. I'm from mine, so I know it's not normal at all.
Mm-mm.
And I mean, look at the Lone Star tick that used to be in Gulf, now it's in Rochester. It's affecting us. How it is happening? Because of all this climate change. So broadly speaking, the physical impact can be directly assessed through mortality. So there are so many people who have lost their lives and their loved ones in wildfires. So that is a direct physical impact. Then, of course, as my colleague talked about, the pollution and the smoke that's built up in the atmosphere because of these wildfires can cause respiratory illnesses and issues. There was a research, interesting research last year. I think I read it. It was a multi-nation, multi-center clinical trial observational study, and they looked at the X-rays of people who have no predisposing risk factors for any kind of respiratory illnesses, no cancers, nothing, no history, no family history. And they found that they had soot, literally the deposition of the smoke in the lungs beyond the level that we anticipate in anybody. And they were the metropolitan patient cohorts. And just imagine if you have just breathing the air itself, you're getting it and accumulating it over a period of time, how much detrimental it will be on your health. You're gonna have all kind of, forget about the cancer. Cancer is a very different thing. You have to have some mutation, which this carbon soot can cause it, of course. But restrictive issues, obstructive lung diseases, breathing issues, all those kind of physical impact that we see, it's terrible. And then we have drought, scarcity of food and water. Imagine if what impact it will have on the development of children. And if somebody is pregnant, they're gonna give birth not to normal babies. They might have congenital abnormalities. It's just not good. It's absolutely abhorrible. And that results in then the interstate migration. People from California now, because of the wildfires, they're moving to different states. And then we have immigration at the national level. People coming from, from Eastern Europe, for example, to the Western Europe because we had floodings last year in Eastern Europe. So it takes a lot of physical toll, and mental aspect we'll talk about a little bit later, but elevated temperature. We have now mild winters and more summers, and the temperature goes high. We all know the impact of this elevated temperature on the human health. I mean, heat stroke for that matter. You should not take it seriously. Don't say, oh, somebody had a predisposition for subarachnoid hemorrhage and they had this mutation, they have this weight abnormalities. Yes, that is there too, but this temperature, extreme temperature, just exacerbate that risk. And now you will have that. Young people are having those heat strokes. It's terrible. Cardiovascular diseases, heart attack, cardiac arrest, all these things are happening because of these temperatures. So it is nothing good comes out of this, and the sooner we address this and make an actionable plan, the better.
And I would add that one of the studies I read, they had record heat-related deaths in Texas last year for the first time in years. They had these astronomical numbers, and they did a demographic survey of the people who were impacted. Most of them had an air conditioner, but it was malfunctioning and it wasn't working properly. And they were generally at-risk individuals or people who worked outdoors. So think about your healthcare workers who run on an ambulance, your firefighters, anybody who delivers mail in an urban area is usually doing it by foot. So they were all out in those elements, and they had people who shouldn't have died who died because of heat-related deaths. Do you guys want to talk a little bit about mental health?
Sure. Are you guys feeling anxious yet? Climate change can cause a lot of worry. In the area of health psychology, we're very interested in the connections between physical health and mental health, and really bidirectional influences, right? You get sick, and that can also cause you lots of stress. Experiencing chronic stress can also make you more likely to become ill. So climate change is going to be a stressor that we're going to face at the individual level and at the population level. And it's something that we need to grapple with in the coming years. So anxiety is normal. One of the things to recognize, I think, first is that as we're experiencing changes, any change can be stressful. And we're going to have a lot of things that occur with the weather, with the environment, that are going to be unprecedented, that are going to be out of the norm, and that are going to be harder to predict what's going to happen from one season to another season, and what's going to change in different regions of the country, different regions of the world, as climate affects weather patterns. And so if you've seen on the news or you've directly experienced in your home community, things like flooding, or droughts like we've talked about, or a very unusually mild winter, which, you know, can be appealing at times to say, hey, it wasn't as bad this winter, but we're seeing processes become dysregulated as change is happening. And one of the things we know from psychology is that one of the things that really tends to cause anxiety is when something is unpredictable and we don't know what's going to happen. We have a good sense from the science behind our understanding of climate change of the direction that things are going in, but predicting specific events is going to be difficult. And that means a lot of people are going to be in situations. One of the other things that can make things very stressful is when a situation feels uncontrollable and you don't know when something's going to happen. When are we going to get torrential downpour? And that might lead to flooding that doesn't make the national news, but flooding that occurs in local communities. And people might get displaced from their home, right? That's a potentially traumatic event to have someone's home flood. These are the types of things that we're going to have to grapple with emotionally, but that we're going to need to then translate into action, coming together and finding ways to push back against what is causing these changes. And so one of the things that I usually end up kind of sneaking in at some point in one of these panels is to think about not just what you're doing individually, because that can become stressful in and of itself, to put too much burden on ourselves to say, what can I do about this? But to look at who is in a position to have influence at more of a structural or systematic level. That can be an opportunity for you individually, but it can also be an opportunity in the short term to say, well, you know, is there any sort of election coming up where I can vote? And can I look at the candidates locally, nationally, and whether or not doing something about climate change is an important part of their platform, where I can at least exercise that vote. And then I can decide how I want to take action in my own community locally. And whether or not you want to run for office in the future, or do something like that, right? There are always bigger impacts we can have, but there's always an immediate impact that we can have in our local community. And by trying to elevate those to positions of influence who we think are going to make dealing with climate change a priority.
So has anybody ever heard of the term surge capacity? Have you heard of the term?
Surge capacity.
Surge capacity.
Is that in the medical sense?
In the medical
or,
sense, not in the electrical sense.
Yeah.
Um,
Like what they can handle in terms of the
Yes.
capacity of providing care for a particular community?
Right.
Yeah.
So when my understanding of it, how it was explained to me is that every person, every brain, every individual has their own surge capacity, and they typically use it in reference to climate change induced disasters, natural disasters, because it's supposed to be a temporary change that you have to adapt to. So everybody's surge capacity is just a little bit different. When disasters are prolonged or they affect multiple aspects of life, I mean, after flooding, after hurricanes, Katrina had a ton of issues with diseases spreading through the streets or New Orleans had issues after Katrina. People's surge capacity basically maxes out because you only are thinking that you have to adapt, be anxious, cooperate with this change for a short period of time. Natural disasters have prolonged effects. So it makes it much more difficult to deal with the day-to-day effects of everything because it's not day-to-day, it's month-to-month, it's year-to-year. It can be excessively prolonged. So a lot of people have kind of felt like they need to break, something needs to break. So it can be extremely difficult if you have this surge capacity and it's completely topped off because you're dealing with an event. So again, hurricane, tornado, flooding, COVID. And then it makes it impossible to make the day-to-day decisions. You get decision fatigue. You're incredibly anxious. It can affect your sleep, which will just affect things more. It makes it more difficult to deal with everything that you're doing on a daily basis just to live your life. And it's one of those things that we don't think about how the world impacts us if it's remote. Once you are impacted directly, you realize what something like that does to a person's physical body, to their psyche, to the ability to handle stress. And you don't think about it until it impacts you directly. But it is impacting you.
And I would add that that mental health piece also has physical consequences. So one thing that we saw during COVID was people, because of fear, were reluctant to go to healthcare facilities. They were told to stay home. They didn't want to go to the emergency room because they might get COVID and die. That's how they felt. So what we saw in the healthcare field is a rise in preventative problems that escalated it to the point where they resulted in premature death, where years prior, we would have caught it earlier and we would have helped them. But they didn't come see us because they were afraid to.
Yeah.
So there were many people in that boat where the mental stress of that COVID pandemic led to their physical decline because they just did not seek healthcare. And the big thing to keep in mind, and I feel like we're being a lot of doom and gloom here, but it's adaptability. So when you think about a climate change, how do we survive climate change? Can we stop it, for one thing? I mean, logistically, are we going to stop it? Probably not. What happened to cause this climate change happened years ago. It's already happened. So what can we do to prevent further climate change? Maybe we can make changes in our behaviors. And I think some of the other groups are probably talking about that. But in terms of health, when I think about physical health, for example, vector-borne diseases, I think Varun mentioned that we're seeing these ticks that were never here are now here, right? And ticks carry a lot of diseases. I can tell you, I let my dog out last week, and here it is March. We're usually frozen. She came back in and had a tick on her. And I treat them for ticks and fleas, but they still get on them. And it's because the ticks are already awake. They're not asleep like they used to be. Used to be March, you didn't see the ticks until April. Now they're out in March. And are any of you avid outdoors people like me? Do you do a lot of outdoor stuff? You're now at risk for tick-borne diseases. And you have to be really careful. So adaptability, how do you prevent that? So what do you do when you go out? Those of you that go out, do you do anything to prevent vector-borne disease? Bug spray? What else could you do?
Not all bug spray affects ticks.
Yeah, you got to pay attention to which one. How about in the back? Wear pants. So I know summer, you're thinking, I want my shorts on, especially, and not to pick on the guys in the room, but a lot of you have a lot of hair on your legs. That is a tick dream because they have lots to crawl up. And they're not going to stop on your legs. They're going to go up under your pants. They're going to go in places where they can feel comfortable to latch on and live for a while. So have a buddy or a partner or somebody you trust, look at your back and look for ticks, because are you going to feel them if they're on you? That's another good question. A lot of times there's a misconception about ticks. Can you feel them? Usually not. And when they bite you, they numb you. So you're not going to feel it. It's just going to happen to you. And in healthcare, we're seeing more vector-borne diseases that we wouldn't normally see because of these climate changes. And people aren't as prepared. So that whole adaptability piece, knowing what to do in your new environment that's happening around you that you aren't used to. And I think, when you look at waterborne diseases, we're seeing more of them too. And they're kind of scary because usually, what do you do in the summer when it's hot? You go to the lake, right? You go to the beach. And what they're seeing down south is especially in the freshwater places, they're seeing more amoeba-related illnesses, and amoebas are bad. In case you're not aware, you don't want them. They destroy your brain. More types of weird, West Nile is prevalent, which most people are okay with, but some people get severe neurological compromise. So all of those things, you have to learn to adapt because it's not going to adapt for you. It's your job to look at your new environment and say, this is what I need to do to be safe.
And just to add on to that, babesia is now our new malaria.
Mm-hmm.
Babesia is rampant here. And on the mental aspect, last year, I happened to attend the American Psychiatric Association conference. And they were talking about having some new terms. So they talked about eco-anxiety.
Mhm.
And so it's very prevalent. They found from their data that it's very common among people who are 18 to 26 years of age,
Mhm.
people who feel strongly about the environment, or in their household, they grew up having special emphasis on the environment. And that eventually leads to depression, fear, shock, seasonal affective disorder.
Mhm.
Somebody who has no predisposition for any psychiatric issue, they are seeing now a rise and seasonal affective disorder. So you feel, depression symptoms, you feel slow, or you are just disenchanted, having fever, you can't sleep, or you're sleeping more, all these kind of things. And then there was another thing they talked about adding was grief,
Mhm.
especially, and they said they saw that, especially in the indigenous and native population, who lived in Amazon and or who had their own redlined areas and nobody else is allowed. But because of the climate crisis, that's being endangered now, and it's being destroyed or ruined, and that is affecting them. So that is pretty much very similar to the one if you lose somebody in your life, any person, somebody close to you, so it's the same kind of feeling. And they were planning to redefine solastalgia. For those of you who don't know solastalgia, it means detachment because of the loss of something which you were so close to. So they are trying to say that solastalgia should encompass detachment because you have lost the land, or because you have lost the livelihood, or you have lost the property that you once owned. You spent your entire life living in a home, and now this fire happened, and you lost your home, you lost your wife, you lost your children, you lost your parents, you lost everything. So they are trying to involve that, thinking that that will raise awareness among even the healthcare practitioners, because they don't actually overlook all these kind of things. They say, oh no, you are different, something else, nothing to do with the environment, but that is not true. So yeah, as a healthcare provider, we also have to take these things into account, and you have to open it. You have to tell, there should not be any stigma about any psychiatric illness whatsoever. But even if you feel you're not your usual self, look for the symptoms that trigger, and seek help, seek counseling, or seek a psychiatrist and seek professional.
And seek it early, because again, the stigma thing, a lot of people wait until they absolutely need it to ask for help with mental health, because it's difficult to talk about. It's not like saying, oh yeah, I tripped and twisted my ankle and now it hurts a little bit. It's different to kind of open yourself up to somebody kind of picking your brain about how you're feeling. And sometimes it can be difficult to find somebody that you feel comfortable speaking with, because it feels like such a personal thing. If you don't have some type of anxiety or moodiness, depression, very mild even, you're lying to yourself. We all have it to some extent. It's a normal emotion to be sad. It's a normal emotion to be anxious about something. It's all a spectrum of emotions. And I feel like the term spectrum kind of gets used a lot, but it's an accurate depiction of it, because you can have none today. I'm anxious because I'm here speaking. But it doesn't mean that I suffer every single day with that same type of anxiety. So ask for help soon, because you can ask to see a psychiatrist and it may take you months to get seen. There is very little access, and there's an continually growing need for mental health, psychiatric help, counseling services. It can be very difficult to get seen when you need to be. So if you even feel the slightest tinge of maybe I should talk to somebody about how I'm feeling, please reach out. If you have a primary care that you trust, ask for a referral. There are apps out there that make it much more accessible to talk to a counselor. The BetterHelp app is a big one that people advertise. There are options. Find a friend that you can talk to while you wait, but it's difficult to share your burden when you know somebody else is also being burdened with the same things. So find somebody you trust to talk about it with, because if you wait, you may not have access to it.
I just want to add on to that. I always used to teach my psych resident, and also at Rochester, that yes, the patients find it hard to come to you, and it forever takes to get an appointment and to get seen by a psychiatrist or even evaluated by anybody at the hospital. why don't you tell them and make them aware of the tools that we have at our
Mhm.
disposal? For example, screening tool. We have Hamilton Depression Screening
Mhm.
Tool. It's available on the internet. You just have to download it, answer some of the questions and see whether you really should be spending time seeking out the appointment or is something that you were just worked up about. And then we have back inventory. These are the American Psychiatric Association's tools that we have, and you don't need an MD or a DO to do that. You can just do it's a screening tool, not diagnosis, screening tool. So if you are aware of it, and if you're feeling like that, and you don't have any friend or any confidant, or you still feel stigmatized, just go to these tools, utilize them. And likewise, there are many other for different kind of illnesses that it's just the screening forms available. They're freely accessible. They're on the internet. They don't charge any fees. It's just a screening tool. So when you're even showing up for your appointment, you're well prepared. You know what exactly is the cause of the issue. And that will help your provider to give you more solid care.
And I would add to the whole concept of that surge. One thing that, you know, when you're on the outside looking in, it's a remote area. And I'm going to give the example of Maui last year. So I had the pleasure of visiting Maui 2 weeks before it nearly burnt half of Maui. And when I went there, the interesting thing about Maui was they weren't happy to see tourists. They're a tourist island, but they have a lot of resentment over political issues between how Maui and Hawaii in general was taken into statehood. And I was not aware of that. I was blissfully ignorant to how much anger still existed. So after visiting Maui, it became apparent to me that, you know, they have a lot of, like, Native Hawaiians have a lot of animosity towards the mainlanders. And that's what they call us, the people who live in the mainland. And then the wildfires hit. And I don't know if any of you watched the news, but one of the biggest traumas and fears was that because the Native Hawaiian person is not as well off financially as the tourist industry that has taken over Maui, their biggest trauma and fear, in addition to not knowing who died, they waited weeks. So if you can imagine that mental stress of not knowing, just are they dead or are they not dead? I went to Lahaina. I spent a couple days there. Beautiful town. Everything I saw is burned, is gone. People fled for the ocean. They burned in the streets. They weren't able to get out of the town of Lahaina. So they spent months deciding who died, trying to find out, because people fled. They fled their cars. They ran on foot to get away from this advancing wildfire. And afterwards, you would think the biggest fear would be the loss of the loved ones, but it wasn't. It was the loss of their identity and their property. So the big fear that led to their mental distress was that now these rich people from the mainland are going to swoop in and they're going to buy us out. They're going to take more of our land, which leads to more mental distress. So when you look at these disasters, they don't always, the impact isn't just when it happens, it's for years after. It changes everything for years.
Generations.
I mean, I remember Andrews happened in early 90s in
Yes.
Florida, and I still get that shit.
Mhm.
Kind of PTSD.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things that the people who live through it, it never goes away. It's there the rest of their life. It impacts how their life has changed. And can you imagine what healthcare was like in Maui with everything burned? So they didn't have probably great healthcare before because they're an island, right? Not a lot of money. And now all these people need healthcare. Their medical systems were overwhelmed with people with injuries. Absolutely overwhelmed. Just like COVID here overwhelmed the healthcare industry. So that contributes to decline in health because people who need it don't get it. They're just not able to. So adaptability, planning ahead. COVID, they actually did try to adapt, right? We did try to plan ahead, but we didn't succeed, I don't think. I think
It's still too late.
we just didn't succeed. We did try though. We did have some warning. A natural disaster that's climate related, you don't have any warning. It just happens. You're in it. So how do you adapt and what could you put in place in your communities to help people? Food becomes a big issue. So if you think about nutrition, as climate changes, the crops that grow normally in one area aren't going to do well. So last year, I'll give you an example. I garden. My tomatoes did not like how wet our summer was. They had diseases, they didn't do well, and I'm not relying on this to feed my family. I just do it for fun. But I had a very poor tomato crop, and I've gardened for, over 30 years. I've had a garden, not inexperienced, but I couldn't control the weather. So think about agricultural crops that we rely on. If you notice, probably ketchup and tomato sauce went up because I wasn't the only one who had trouble with their tomato crop. The people that sell the tomatoes had trouble.
The entire orange industry was decimated in the last couple of years. They could not grow oranges in Florida because of the climate and how it had been affected from different types of storms. I don't remember if it was flooding or drought, but either way, the oranges were not alive. They were not doing well. The price of oranges in this area, we don't grow oranges up here. And when you think of vitamin C, what do you think of? An orange, right? Everybody thinks of that as being a part of getting nutrition into your diet. The entire fruit industry was affected with growth patterns. With the fluctuations in short-term climate change, last week it was 72 degrees out. This week we have snow on the ground. That affects pollination cycles, insect cycles, the ticks, again, all of that is short-term effects because of those fluctuations. Now stretch that for longer periods of time, for years. And incredibly decimated. My family were farmers, and luckily they were dairy farmers, so they weren't as impacted, but it still affected the earth, the ground. The feed cost to feed a herd of dairy cows was exponentially increased because things aren't growing the way that they should. Things that grow have a cycle. The earth has a cycle. There's a reason why there's a growing season for different types of plants. It's true. And then that causes scarcity. And then, so nutritional impact on people is incredibly massive. We don't think about it because you're like, oh, okay, I don't drink milk that often. Oh, okay, I really don't like oranges. But if the nutrition of a single item, even if you only eat one orange every a month, the nutritional value of that orange is actually decreased because of how the seasonal fluctuations have happened. Entire industries were affected. And that affects us because now it costs more to get food. It costs more to get healthcare. We get sick easier because our food is less nutritionally dense. And then that becomes a physical and a mental strain. And then we can't get the healthcare that we need to take care of it. So you just have to be aware that is happening. You do.
Chris, what do you think? What do you reckon? How can we fix this?
I'm glad you invited me because I have all the answers. Well, we is probably a good thing to take out of that statement, right? That we have an opportunity, and it's going to need to be a we. It's not going to be that can we point to one person to go fix it. Maybe to connect this back to what I was saying earlier, we can think about who are in positions of power, positions of influence, and when we have a say in that, right? Trying to elevate people to those positions who we think are going to bring a team with them to really address the issue and not put the issue on the back burner for other priorities. It's something where, although the specific events like we've been talking about and vary from season to season, and we don't know, is it going to be a particularly good year or bad year for a particular crop? Is it going to be tomatoes that are going to be bad this year? Apples in New York State this past year.
Blossoms all froze.
Yeah, from those cycles becoming less stable in terms of when we can expect consistently warm weather or consistently cold weather and getting frosts at an unusual time. So there's going to be what we can't predict and that we're going to have to be very adaptable to, like Dr. Bellino was saying. But in addition to that, there are things that we absolutely know are going to happen, that we're already experiencing, what we know from the science of climate change, the trend in the direction of a warming planet and more variability, more intensity with storms, changes in weather patterns. And these are things that with the amount of carbon, right, that is creating this global warming effect. And we used to call it global warming. Now climate change is the main term, but the trend is a warming trend right now. So the term global warming, I still feel is plenty accurate to use. We know that that's the trend, and we know that there are things that we can do collectively now to try to mitigate that. But in addition to that, we're going to have to be adaptable. And I think one of the big challenges, you mentioned the terms eco anxiety and eco grief. We heard a few examples of that with the Native population in Maui, right? How much the grief could be a major impact, not just the loss of loved ones, but the loss of someone's community and their yeah. So that's something that we're seeing more awareness of in fields like psychology and psychiatry, and I think it's something that we're all going to have to work through. And one of the big challenges, in addition to trying to push past any stigma with seeking individual help with mental health issues, seeking counseling, which we, in addition to services you can seek out in the community, remember you have services here through our health center that you shouldn't be hesitant to use, or to talk to professors or RA about if you're struggling with things, and if they seem, that they are the types of things that we might just say, well, it's just sort of an existential crisis. I'm worried about the environment. And you might say, well, that's not something that you need to see a counselor about. There are real effects of that, right? And that can get in the way of our ability to focus on what we're doing day to day and to maintain hope and motivation to want to address the issue. There's a really interesting little book that I came across a couple years ago by the primatologist Jane Goodall. Probably most people know Jane Goodall's name. She's pretty famous, but she's also spent a lot of her life as a conservationist, looking at how things like climate change, deforestation, tourist industries, things like that can affect different ecological systems throughout the world. And there's a book from a couple years ago that is just called The Book of Hope. It's by Jane Goodall and a co-author. And it's really just an extended interview with her, where her co-author sits down and brings her lots of tough questions, like the question you asked me that I can't answer. And I thought she provided a really interesting perspective. And she distilled her perspective down to 4 different things that give her hope, even though she is not someone who looks at the situation environmentally in our world today with rose-colored glasses. She sees the seriousness of it. She sees the potential peril that we face. But she gets hope from 4 things. She says one is that nature is resilient. And if we can shift our behaviors to stop doing things that are counter to what is good for our natural environment, nature can be incredibly resilient. So we should have hope in that. However, the rest come from us. And one, she says, is look at the human intellect. We have the ability to come up with solutions. We are smart enough to do that individually and collectively.
And that was my next question.
Yeah.
Maybe, how do you reduce, what are your thoughts about reducing carbon footprint in an individual capacity?
Well, from an,
Something our
yeah.
students and audience can do here.
Yeah, and I think when you guys think about how you live, I mean, in terms of carbon footprint, think about what you do that increases that carbon footprint and reduce it. Maybe it's, you could carpool instead of drive singly to an event. So 4 people in a car saves a lot of carbon as opposed to 1 person in 4 cars. So simple things like that just reduce your carbon footprint. The other thing that individuals can do within communities, which is really important to remember. So it kind of takes a village to survive any of these things. And climate change is one of the things that you can't do it by yourself. It doesn't work. You're not going to help just by yourself. But reaching out in your own communities and developing community action groups is a huge way to deal with some of this, because you anticipate, okay, Texas had record heat and record deaths last year. My hope is that those community health individuals, and these can be people, even lay people, who are interested in community health, are developing a plan to, how do we look in on at-risk individuals, right? Could we help them? Could we give them a temporary place to go during that heat event? Because we have that. If you look at places that routinely get hurricanes, Florida, they get hurricanes all the time. They have plans in place. The problem is Texas never had all these deaths, so they don't necessarily have a plan for it. So looking at the climate change and where you live, because it's gonna be different for all of us, right? It's not the same here as it is on the West Coast or in middle states. Everywhere is different. So knowing your own risk factors for adapting and what you could possibly do to help mitigate that. And that whole carbon footprint, just avoiding anything excessive that you don't have to do. I mean, big bonfires aren't necessary. You don't have to do that. You don't have to expend, resources as quickly. We can reuse things. I know, with the advent of online shopping, I'm guilty. I love to shop online and I love to buy things, but you don't want to go to our landfills because we get rid of things as fast as we buy them. So looking at being, frugal and only getting what you actually need helps a lot.
I was just thinking the same thing too. Fast fashion is not good usually not good for the people who are making the items. And then also not good for the environment because the materials are less likely to be able to be recycled. And just the other day, I ordered something on Amazon. They give you the option, fewer boxes for delivery. You can put everything in, if they give you the option, otherwise, the pair of boots I ordered is coming in 2 separate boxes. So the process of making that and then recycling it is 2 boxes. Why did it need 2 boxes? It didn't. And you can do small things like that make an impact. If you're going to buy online, you're going to buy online, but choose one box. What were Jane's other antidotes?
So they were all about what she sees in terms of human potential. So she said that the human intellect is something that, she got famous for demonstrating how intelligent chimpanzees are and showing some of the first evidence of tool use. But she said, hey, we're just as smart and actually smarter. We know how to address the problem. And then she says it's what she calls the indomitable human spirit, that she thinks we just need to be motivated to do something about it. And just that other species that want to survive, we can persist in addressing the issue. And then the 4th one, she says, that inspires her and gives her hope is young people. We can do a lot, even though we're older. You can take action at any time, but she says, I see how younger people care about the issue and can bring great ideas and motivation. We just need to make sure that they know how to get involved. So that's it. The best advice I can ever give is advice I steal from other people. It's a nice thing.
So what questions do you guys have? We've kind of monopolized everything up here. Any questions, comments? Don't be shy. Go ahead.
What's your best argument for someone who favors business and, expanding financially over environmental?
You can do both. You can be a successful business and be environmentally conscious. There are ways to do it. There are people out there who are business advisors that advise big business on how to be more economically effective and how to reduce their carbon footprint. So as technology and business develop, I think we're just going to have more and more options to be environmentally conscious. There are ways to do it. You have to, if you're going into business and say somebody wants to open their own business, good for you. I wish you all the success in the world. If you go in remembering to be environmentally conscious, you will seek out a way to do that. If they really don't care, I feel like that's from a previous generation. I feel like there's a lot of generational changes in how people view the environment.
And I think from a governmental perspective, they're very influential in business development, and you can get money if you're doing the right things. So there is some political motivation for new companies to have a team that makes sure, because you can't just do it by accident. You have to have a purposeful group. So my husband works for Corning Incorporated as an engineer, and they're constantly growing their business, expanding it, but they have a group that looks at their footprint. And, they had some things in the past with the glass industry that they made mistakes. They didn't know they were polluting things, or they didn't know what it would cause, and now they do. So you're going to see, if you talk to industry especially, they're very good about trying to be on the good side of things because they want to get the financial gain that comes from it. Other questions?
Is anybody particularly passionate about the environment? And that's why you came to a panel today?
Some of you are. Some of you are here for mandated classroom performance. We know. What majors do we have in here? What are you guys gonna do when you leave Elmira College?
Business.
You got some business people I know.
Oh.
Not business, what's your major? Biology? Who else? What do we have in the room? Any education majors? Okay, so education, what do you think your role's gonna be? You're a teacher. Okay, so how will that impact climate change and how? How can you make a difference in your new field? What do you think? You're dealing with middle schoolers. First of all, they're like the worst people on the planet. So. There you go. So you can bring what you know to them and hopefully encourage them to move into future goals that are similar to your own.
Awareness is half the battle.
Any business majors here? Business has a lot of influence. What could you guys do? You guys are very influential people in business. What do you think? What could you do in the business? What area of business do you want to do? Do you have an area yet? Are you marketing, management? Any marketing people? Who's my marketing? All right, so I'm gonna pick on you. So what do you think? As a marketing person, what influence could you have? He's got a great smile, so you can influence people. So as a marketing person, you have the ability to influence people. And you're probably good at it, would be my guess. That's what marketing people do. So influencing public opinion. You might not do it for your job, but maybe you get involved in a community action group outside of your job, where your goal is to promote the environment and you're that marketing resource. We're not all gifted at marketing. We're not all good at it. You need somebody that knows how to display information in a way that appeals to other people. And that's a big deal. I'm from the management side. You could actually be the person who coordinates the event in your community and helps them figure out how to navigate all the obstacles that will appear when you start talking about making any kind of change. I mean, I don't know about any of you. How many of you like change? Like they say, we're going to change something today at the college and you all say, yay, right? I want to be different. Nobody does. So anytime you're trying to make a change, you got to get buy-in and it's hard. Even if it's the right thing to do, it's still hard because people are comfortable doing what they always do. And we're all guilty of that. Not anyone in this room is not guilty of liking to keep that status quo. But with climate change, we need to kind of break out of that.
What do you do in your individual capacity, which is environmental conscious?
Reusable.
I see 4. That was. That's okay, nobody has an answer.
Is it plastic water bottle or glass? That's good. What else do you do to reduce your own carbon footprint?
How many people have cars on campus? Not that many out of the whole group. I think people just didn't raise their hands, but how many people live on campus in the dorms? So you're not commuting every day? There's some specifics obviously to be able to live off campus, but those all reduce your carbon footprint. You're not driving to and from school every single day. You're not, yeah, I mean, that's a big one.
Do you guys recycle in the dorms? So you have the opportunity to recycle, which is a positive thing. What else do you do? Mm-hmm. Very good. And that's an easy thing to do, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't take a lot of thought or energy.
So, I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the whole food thing for me, the biggest problem I have with it is it's kind of a haves versus the have-nots. So I did a lot of patient education for cardiac patients and, we want to tell them fresh fruits and vegetables. But I live about, I don't know, 50 minutes south of here in Pennsylvania. And I live in what you would call a food desert. Does anybody understand the term food desert relative to nutrition? So a food desert is when you live somewhere where you can't adequately get fresh fruits and vegetables. They don't exist. We don't have produce where I live. You have to be able to drive 30 minutes to get to a store that has produce. So for the people where I live, they're already relying on canned foods, cheap starches like pasta, ramen. So how do you, help people? So one of the things that you can do is promote a community garden that groups of people do together on someone's property that has property, because not everybody has property. So some small towns like where I live, they have community garden space, and I think they do one on campus here every spring. But, that becomes really important if you live in an area where you have to drive 30 minutes, because that's how it is where I live. I drive 50 minutes to work every day, 30 minutes to get to a grocery store that has fresh fruits or vegetables. So if you don't have a car, can you get fresh fruits and vegetables easily? Can you afford them? Because obviously, if you don't have a car where I live, you probably don't have a lot of money. That's just the God's honest truth. So when we look at climate change, how do we make sure that, we can get access to these things or we can afford them? Because if you've bought groceries recently, they're outrageously expensive right now. Like if you don't have a lot of money, it's hard to get much for what you have. So food pantries become a big deal. So, when you think about climate change and nutritional density and where you live, maybe having a food pantry in your town is a way to help people who can't help themselves. Because we're all responsible for each other, that whole sense of community. And I think, this generation with social media and Zoom and electronics, we lose that social connection that used to help people, and redeveloping that into communities where you feel responsible for your neighbor, making sure they get to eat. That makes a big difference in climate change, because people I've talked to who've lost things in disasters, they go a couple years without getting it fixed. I had a house fire. It took 6 months to get back in my home. So my family, I had 4 children at the time, still do, they're grown up. We were displaced for 6 months, if you can imagine. And that's just a house fire. That's not a natural disaster. They're displaced much longer. So I think we're at our time.
Just about.
Yeah, so any last minute questions? Otherwise, we'll respect your time commitment and let you guys enjoy your day. Thank you for coming.
The microphone picks everything. It's good. Everything is echoing.
Thank you for coming. I really appreciate it.